open your mouth. Find a way to change the narrative a bit and ask them a few questions. So my example that I'm demonstrating for you is very simple. I asked you a question. Do you believe there are clandestine agents? Everybody very much agreed. Find something that they know, that you know they pretty much agree is as known and is truthful, right? Find it in the conversation. Ask them that question, have them affirm it. Then take the next step. Now you are a very agreeable audience. Probably in another audience, I'd have to work on getting them from, you accept the fact that we have clandestine agents. Do you accept the fact that they have clandestine agents? Some audiences, it would take me a while to get to that point, right? I want you to get to that point. Ask your friends and family that refuse to listen to this stuff to just ask them a few questions to get them to the point where they're engaged in talking about the fact that we have clandestine agents in our US agencies and government officials. We do. What Mr. Loudon talks about in his books and in his research and in his writings and in his communicating and out speaking engagements, what, 10 years ago, Mr. Loudon, 10 years ago, we got a much different reaction, much more hostile.
Yeah,
when did it start kind of shifting?
Yeah, look at the deep state and the advent of Trump has woken a lot of people up. And you can just call me Trevor too, by the way. That's all right.
So, you know, we're feeling, people like Mr. Trevor and I are feeling the shift in the conversation. I'm asking you to capitalize on it and talk about it. So, here's my message for you today. Again, I'm an intelligence officer of 21 years, naval intelligence. I specialize in counterterrorism and foreign policy. I've been doing this for over 21 years. 10 of those 21 years were on active duty overseas. That's the context I want you to think about how I learned so many of these things. Southern Minnesota boy should know nothing from nowhere. How in the world does he end up in this situation and then end up meeting such a wonderful gentleman as Trevor and fighting this fight that we're fighting? This fight is real. This is not our imagination. You go to your family and friends, you find a way to have the conversation that in and around us, we have clandestine agents that are intending to harm our nation. Every single thing that they do is not happenstance. It's for a measured reaction and agenda. So when we talk about that, for example, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and all of this Russia hoax that they committed, they created a false crime to entrap and or punish a US citizen, Donald Trump. But just think about the law for a minute, and it should scare the ever-living hell out of all of you. US government officials fabricated a crime to attack a US citizen, and they used a foreign government to help them attempt to entrap and punish a US citizen. If you don't understand the full concept of what's happening there, and some of the government agencies that I've been involved with as an intelligence officer, and now with Mr. Loudon coming to you and speaking to you from all of that background and history that he has, if we do not understand how serious this is, we are going to lose this country. We are going to lose our Constitution. We are going to lose our republic. I'm not asking you to stand up and run around getting weapons and shooting people. I'm not asking you to run out the door and form some kind of militia. I'm asking you to have the conversation with every single person that will possibly listen to you. Research the data, don't get angry, persuade them to think about the law. Approach this from the law. For me, I've often been accused of being a racist or a bigot or an anti, what do they call it? Islamophobia? Is that actually a word? No, it's not a word, and it's not a disease. You can't have an irrational phobia of something that's real. People running around cutting people's heads off is real. It's not an irrational phobia to think about, I don't want my head cut off. Okay, that's not irrational. I would say that's pretty rational. Okay, so we as a group need to keep having the conversations, and we can have the conversations. It is changing. We are making progress. Is it hard? Is it frustrating? If you have a fix-it personality and you want it fixed right now, I get it. I understand your frustration, but stay at it and be prayerful. If nothing else, I can tell you with my Lord and Savior as my witness, if you can't feel like you've done anything else, if you get down tonight on your knees and you feel so helpless that there's no hope left for the world, and you sit there and say, in the name of my Lord and Savior Jesus, I'm asking you to give us strength and courage and guidance, I guarantee you your prayer will be answered. With everything that I am, without describing my boring history, I can tell you that I would not be here today. I should not be here today if it were not for my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Period. I would not be physically standing here. That's the God's truth. Have the conversations. Be serious about this. Enough about me. Mr. Loudon, Trevor, has many wonderful books, many wonderful videos. I know some of you maybe hate social media, maybe hate YouTube and stuff like that. Get out there and look at his stuff. Listen to it. Read some of the material. Then compare Mr. Loudon's stuff, Trevor's stuff, to some of the other people like myself who've been out there and doing these things. Pick a piece of it from Trevor's stuff or from mine or people that like us. Pick a piece from it and introduce it to one of your friends. And hopefully they'll introduce it to somebody. So I'm done kind of massaging your brains and hearts for a minute, trying to inspire you. And I really appreciate, I would love to call him a personal friend of mine. I think someday probably Trevor and I will probably call each other personal friends. But Mr. Loudon's been fighting this fight for a long time. He doesn't know how much of his stuff I've actually watched. I've actually watched some of his stuff for a different reason, which turned out to be a good thing for me. But you can imagine being an intelligence officer during that Obama administration, where we had all the jihadist training stuff all ripped from all the research ripped from under us and destroyed. We had all the research and all the background information from the Holy Land trials ripped out from us and destroyed. We had everything that we had about the Muslim Brotherhood and CARE and all those groups that are intending us harm ripped out from our databases and thrown away so we couldn't reference them, and actually got chastised when we did. God's truth. So, Mr. Loudon, thank you for all you've done. Again, in this short time, I can't describe how much I actually do know about him. But I'm trying to inspire you to actually leave here today with the information that Trevor has. Be inspired enough to have a couple of conversations a week, a couple of conversations a month, to try and persuade somebody to understand that our republic is the only government on the face of the planet that actually allows for what and who we are about. It's the only one. And I've been around the world, and I've seen lots of governments, and I've studied lots of reasons why those governments fail. And if we allow people to destroy our Constitution and our republic, we are going to fail. We will fail. And we'll fail overnight, like that when we learn. All right, enough with me. Hopefully I've inspired enough. So, Trevor,
Is the other lady going to speak?
all right. Thank you, sir. Okay, thank you very much for letting me have this.
Hey, you two ought to become friends.
Thank you very much, Phil, and thanks, Wes, for organising this, and thanks everybody for being here, and a shout out to my good friend Mark from the JBS up the back. They've got literature that you got to read.
You know, I started reading JBS literature when I was 18, 19 years old back in New Zealand, and it really helped me get a handle on things, really did. But and thanks for the compliments, Phil. What am I doing here? I'm a bit disorganized. Thanks for the compliments, Phil. It's very nice to be, you know, Phil's a professional intelligence officer. I am really self-taught, you know, so it's very nice to hear compliments like that from a professional. But just start with a little story. Some of you may have heard it before. I was in Los Angeles a while back, and I love street food. So I walk up to a street vendor and I buy some food, and the guy looks at me and says, "You've got an accent. Where are you from?" And I said, "I'm from New Zealand." He said, well, where's that? So to make it really, really easy for him, I said, "Look, it's down in the Pacific next to Australia." He said, "Where Arnold Schwarzenegger comes from." So that explains why Californians vote the way they do sometimes, right? But as Phil alluded to, you know, people always ask me, you know, why as a New Zealander should I care about the politics, or why should I care about America? Well, there's two simple reasons, and Phil said it, you know. My country was facing invasion during World War II. My parents know this very well. And if it hadn't been for the sacrifice of your fathers and uncles and grandfathers at the battles of Guadalcanal in the Coral Sea and Midway, we would have been done. We were facing invasion and annihilation, and we were saved by your people. That's a very strong memory, folks. The second reason is related, but it's a little more selfish. Now, Ronald Reagan had it right. This is the last best hope for mankind. If you should ever lose your constitution, your liberty, your economic dynamism, and your military superiority, all of which took a huge trashing through the Obama years, if that trend had continued, we would very soon be living in a world run out of Moscow and Beijing and Havana and Tehran. And is that the kind of world you'd like to leave to your grandchildren, people? You know, that'd be horrific. And it'll be for 1,000 years, folks. Because tyranny these days has technology. You know, imagine North Korea all over the world with heat-seeking technology. Where do you hide? Where do you hold your church meeting when they know exactly where you are at any time? So I want to say a couple of things about the 2016 presidential election. Now, does anybody believe there may have been a touch of the miraculous on that election? Just a little bit. And I think even an atheist would have to acknowledge that one, right? You know, it was completely, we were told it was all over by the shouting. Hillary was going to win, it was guaranteed, and it didn't turn out that way. Well, I think we were given a God-given opportunity there. But we got to understand that that wasn't saving America, that was giving America another chance. Because for 100 years, America had been drifting into socialism, progressivism, and it was almost going over the cliff. And we got another shot. And if you look at the Old Testament, there were a lot of times when the Israelites got a second chance, right? But how many times did they get a third chance? You know, so I think we got to make very wise use of this opportunity we have. It wasn't a chance to have a holiday. It was a chance to work even harder to save this republic. We got a shot. Second thing I'll say is, you know, I know how hard a lot of the people in this room work. You know, you've been active in the Tea Party or the GOP. You know, you're putting up signs, you're writing out checks, you're driving miles, you're going to meetings. And you put a lot into this, and it's pretty thankless work. But tell me this, on election night 2016, was it all worth it?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Would you do it all again to get the same result? Because you gave your country hope, right? Not just your country, every freedom lover around the world got hope from that election. And here's something a little more cynical. The Germans have a wonderful word, schadenfreude. It means taking pleasure in the pain of others. And it's not a noble thing, right? You don't boast about it. But on election night 2016, at 2 o'clock in the morning, when they panned the Democratic Party headquarters in New York, and you saw those little snowflakes bawling their eyes out and hugging each other, did you feel a little tinge of schadenfreude? Right? Maybe a lot of schadenfreude. And do you think after 8 years of Obama trashing your country that you deserved it?
Yes.
Well, they got a little bit back in 2018, as we all know. But what do you think? Do you want to feel a whole bunch of it in 2020? Could you imagine when President Trump wins in 2020, folks, you imagine what those snowflakes are going to feel like then. You just savor that feeling, people. It's going to be pretty awesome, I'll tell you that. So what I deal with, as Phil alluded to, I deal with national security. Because I think, no matter what you do in your country, if you can't secure your liberty and secure your property, secure your borders, what have you got? Nothing's permanent, is it? But I deal with that different aspect of it than is normally discussed. And I'm sure there's many military or former military people in the room who have taken that famous oath to defend your constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, right? And which are ultimately more dangerous? The foreign enemy over there with a gun pointed at you wearing a uniform, or somebody standing in your Congress wearing a suit and tie, working to crash your constitution every chance they get. Which is more dangerous? And how much attention has been put on those domestic enemies in recent years? Zip. The most dangerous. You send your brave sons and daughters overseas in uniform every day to risk their lives, to fight horrible enemies with great bravery and efficiency, and you allow them to be betrayed in your own Congress every day they're doing that job, folks. Every day. How do we not owe it to those brave sons and daughters to have their back, to elect leaders who actually have their back? Send them into a war if they really have to, but allow them to win it and bring them home as soon as possible. Isn't that the best situation? And that's not happening right now, is it? Well, it certainly wasn't up until recently. At least I've got to give President Trump a lot of credit, because from what I hear, the gloves are off now, the rules of engagement have changed, and your people are actually able to fight to win now. Isn't that a novel concept? So I deal with internal security, and I deal with these internal enemies. Now, so if you look at, put it this way, if you look at Minnesota, there's a little bit of a history in this state, and it leads to why the state is has the problems it has today. Back in 1890s, 1905, they had Finland at that time used to be part of the Russian Empire, and they had a lot of communists in Finland. The communism was big right on those all around that area. And in 1905, there was a revolution in Russia, an attempted revolution against the Tsar, and it failed. And the Tsar was not very happy, and he came after the revolutionaries. And thousands of those communist Finns left the country, and they came right into Minnesota, because the Iron Range of Minnesota was more like Finland than anywhere else they could find. And so you had a whole thousands of them settled up in the northern part of this state. And so most states, you have a city which is full of liberals, and you have a countryside which is full of conservatives. But Minnesota, right from the get-go, had a whole party or countryside that was full of communists. And that really tilted things to the left in this state. Then you had the Democratic Farmer Labor Party, which started up in the 30s. And that was really started by the Communist Party. That was a huge part of it. The Farmer Labor part of it was communist. So they had the communists getting in to your DFL right from the early days. And then you came into the 60s and 70s and you had the big universities in St. Paul, and they were full of Maoists and radicals and anti-Vietnam War protesters. And you had the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, which sprang out of that, which is very strong in the state right now. And then you had the Communist Party still going along, working very closely with some of your members of Congress and senators. Mark Dayton and others, very close to the Communist Party. Mark Ritchie, your famous Secretary of State who gave the election to Al Franken, was a secret Communist Party supporter, and he kept on finding votes and votes and votes until they got Franken elected, and that vote was what got Obamacare through. And so then you had all these, then you had Democratic Socialists of America, which has now got about 600 members, 1,100 members in the Twin Cities, and about 50 members in your city, Rochester. Just busily working away under the radar, just infiltrating the Democratic Party and just causing general mayhem. And this set the stage, the red set the stage for the green. Because there is an axis out there. It's a red-green axis. Communists and Islamists working together to bring America down. And how do you bring America down? You bring people into America in large numbers who don't believe in American values, who are actually inimical to American values in many cases. So you've had the left deliberately working to flood this country with as many Islamic refugees as they possibly could. And they didn't put them in Los Angeles or Boston, because the left already has that. They put them into the conservative areas of the Midwest. You go up to Wilmar, Minnesota, or St. Cloud. Wilmar has got 15,000 people, 5,000 of them are Somali Muslims. Imagine what that's doing to that town. Imagine what it's doing to your conservative voting base. St. Cloud, right in the heart of Michelle Bachmann's old district. Well, how long do you think it's going to be before SEIU goes into those Somali communities and ships them all around the state to vote multiple times wherever they're needed? It's a deliberate plan to turn Minnesota into a sort of Islamist Marxist fortress. Really a state within a state, where they can use, Keith Ellison can sue the president, and he can institute hate speech laws, and he can set the tone and bring, turn the state into a sanctuary state, so that you guys become a permanent minority in your own state. Does this seem exaggerated in any way?
No.
You can see this happening. Maybe if I told you this 15 years ago, you might have been a little bit skeptical. But I don't think any of you are skeptical now. You see this happening before your very eyes. The only argument is whether this is just an accident of history or whether this has been deliberately planned. And I don't believe in accidents of history, people. I believe that this country has multiple enemies in the world who will work with your weak and dishonest within your own country to infiltrate themselves into here, set up bases, and basically work to take you down. Because this is the greatest republic the world has ever seen, the first republic that said that your rights came from God and they came directly to the people, and you had the right to elect representatives to protect those rights. Every tyrant in the world is offended by that concept, people. Whether they're communist or Islamist or fascist or whatever they are, they hate the idea of America. And they want to bring it down, and they want to take what you've got. Isn't that the way of history? People have always tried to take what other people have, and if you weren't able to defend it, you lost it. And America up till now has been able to defend it, but under Obama, it almost lost that capacity. And it's only just starting to recover now. So, Minnesota, virtually your whole congressional delegation is Marxist, including Tim Walz, your governor. He trained in the Wellstone, came out of, remember Paul Wellstone, your famous senator? Most Minnesotans do not realize he was a Marxist. Now, they think he's a populist, sort of nice populist guy. He was a hardcore devotee of Democratic Socialists of America, a Marxist group. They came into Minnesota. They made it a big project to elect him. They were going to run him for president. But he lost his life in a plane crash. But he trained Amy Klobuchar. He trained Tim Walz. He trained a whole bunch of your politicians through his Wellstone Action School. Keith Ellison comes out of the communist movement. He was actively supported by the Communist Party USA, held fundraisers in the living room of Erwin Marquette, the leader of the Minnesota Communist Party, actively involved with Louis Farrakhan. People don't need to understand that the Nation of Islam is very left-wing. Farrakhan was in Cuba a year ago paying homage to Fidel Castro. So this red-green axis has huge power in Minnesota, and it's got most of your congressmen and senators on the left side in their grip. Virtually all your Democrats are Marxist. Even Colin Peterson, the so-called conservative Democrat from up north, been to Cuba, 4 times, works with Mark Fromke very closely, the head of the Communist Party in the state now. All of them are, a whole lot. So, but on a national scale, see, people say, well, look, it's impossible for radicals and communists to actually get in our Congress, right? That could never happen. Well, people believe that there are no communists for a start, but that's been proven fallacious over the recent years. But they say, well, look, we'll put it this way. How would I describe it? So, has anybody in this room ever had to undergo any form of FBI check or background check for a government position? Okay, quite a few. Phil, obviously, and you, or quarter of the room, basically. Now, is it true that those background checks can be very, very rigorous? They might take a couple of years sometimes. They interview your family members, childhood friends, they check your finances out, look at your overseas travel, criminal convictions, even bounce checks. Because they need to know that you're going to be a loyal servant of the Constitution. You're in the federal government, the leadership of the free world. And this country has many enemies who use your weak and dishonest to betray you. So they need to be able to trust you. But what if you're a young Marxist radical who hangs around with the Communist Party and they control the local Democrats, which they do all over the country, and they put a suit and tie on you and they get you elected to Congress, where you may serve on the Armed Services Committee or the Homeland Security Committee or even the Intelligence Committee? How much of an FBI background check do you need for that one, folks? 0. Because the people are supposed to vet the candidates, right? And the media is supposed to help you do it, right? Well, how's that been working out? Can you see the problem there? So, and then you get into Congress. But so the FBI would not allow radicals to get into Congress, right? The FBI would be on the case. Well, how much on the case was the FBI over Hillary Clinton? Right? They knew what she was going to do to the FBI if they did try to do something to her. The FBI has not investigated congressmen since at least the 1940s. At least. Do you think your enemies may be aware of this fact? You think maybe they know about this? That there's no background checks in Congress and the FBI does not dare to go after them? And the media is not going to touch them. So you get elected, no media scrutiny, no background checks. And just think about this. Which committee in Congress does the FBI answer to? Does anyone know? Well, it's the Judiciary Committee, which administers the Department of Justice and, oversees the Department of Justice and the FBI. So the FBI is supposed to catch the bad guys and the Justice Department is supposed to prosecute them. Okay, so now who's on the Judiciary Committee? Well, up until a year or two ago, you had a man called John Conyers who was the head of that. Now, John Conyers, I think he was in Congress 140, 160 years approximately, and he was, until he had to resign in a little bit of a scandal, but he was, I would say, one of the most treasonous Congress members you ever had. Because John Conyers had a 50-year history with the Communist Party USA, 40 years with Democratic Socialists of America, which is worse than the Communist Party USA. He was heavily involved with the Workers' World Party, which supports North Korea and Cuba and Iran. They're the people who ripped down Confederate statues in Louisiana and North Carolina. And he was also a big supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood. And he's in my movie, and I hope you get a copy tonight. John Conyers, when some of your congressmen tried to get the Muslim Brotherhood as a designated terrorist organization, John Conyers gets up in the Judiciary Committee and says, oh no, we shouldn't do that because the Muslim Brotherhood have forsworn violence. They're a peaceful social service agency now. Forgetting about Hamas and Al-Qaeda and ISIS that they all fathered. So, on the Judiciary Committee, you've also got Judy Chu from California, who was a long-time supporter of the Communist Workers' Party, the most militant pro-Chinese Communist Party in the country, goes to China all the time. The Chinese press describe her as China's best friend in your Congress. And you should see Judy Chu go off on the FBI whenever they have the temerity to arrest one of the more than 25,000 Chinese spies currently operating in this country. You are racist, she says. The FBI is a racist organization. You're only persecuting these people because you hate Chinese. And she has arranged for sensitivity training for FBI officers so they don't persecute these poor Chinese spies. And until recently, you had Luis Gutierrez on the Judiciary Committee. A former leader of the pro-Cuban Puerto Rican Socialist Party, a Marxist-Leninist group, worked with the Communist Party, Democratic Socialists of America, and the Council on American Islamic Relations, the main Muslim Brotherhood front group in this country. And the media right now has been freaking out because, well, a lot of the conservatives have been freaking out because there's a socialist in Congress now. Did you know that? Ocasio-Cortez. She's a socialist. She's a member of Democratic Socialists of America. The sky's going to fall. Well, Jerry Nadler, who's the head of the Judiciary Committee, the man who will lead the impeachment of President Trump, the top law enforcement official in your country, joined Democratic Socialists of America in 1977. He's been an active supporter ever since. And he oversees the FBI and the Justice Department. What do you think is going to happen to the FBI's budget if they come to the Judiciary Committee and say, look, we need to actually start investigating some congressmen. Is that okay? Can we have some money? And by the way, we actually need to investigate you, Mr. Nadler. Is that all right? What do you think is going to happen? So there's no media scrutiny for congressmen. There's no background checks for congressmen. And the FBI doesn't dare come after you because they have to get past the Judiciary Committee, which is stacked full of enemy agents, complete enemy agents. I'll give you a couple more examples, one from a neighboring state and one from Indiana. Andre Carson from Indiana, right? One of your 3 Muslim members of Congress. Now, I've got him on tape again, so you don't take my word for it. He's in my movie. He's at a Muslim Brotherhood front group conference in Connecticut in 2012. He gets up in front of the assembled crowd. He's got a big grin on his face. He says, I understand there are people here in the audience spying on us. They're undercover because they believe we are here plotting to destroy this country. And then he really grins. He says, well, I say to you people undercover, Allah will not allow you to stop us. This man serves on the Intelligence Committee, people. overseeing the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, DEA, all 16 of your intelligence agencies. He's one of 4 Marxists on your intelligence agency right now, including the head of it, and including Adam Schiff, who's so close to China you would not believe. You know, he goes on about Russia. He's been working with the Chinese for 20 years now. And one more from the neighboring Wisconsin, Tammy Baldwin, the senator from Wisconsin, right? Presidential ambition she has. Well, who's heard of the FARC, terrorist guerrillas in Colombia, South America? They've had a 50-year communist revolution running in that country. They're known as narco-terrorists because they fund their revolution by selling cocaine to your young people. Cocaine and heroin, fentanyl, you name it. Do you have a heroin problem in the state by any chance? Okay, how many? 60,000 Americans a year die from this stuff coming through China and through Latin America, pushed by the communists. What do you have to do to be, have a declaration of war against you? Kill 60,000 Americans a year, and that's okay. And you still got most favored trading nation status. So anyway, Tammy Baldwin has been a member of a support group for that terrorist organization since 1993. She has used her position in your Congress, when she was a Congress member, on several occasions to try and get US military aid cut off to the Colombian government, which would make it easier for the Colombian communists to take over that country. Working in your Congress to the benefit of an enemy of your ally. This happens all the time, people. There are at least 100 members of your Congress right now, nearly a quarter of the body, and at least 20 to 25 members of the US Senate, nearly a quarter of the Senate, who are so enmeshed in Muslim Brotherhood fronts, communist organizations, working with the Chinese, the Cubans, or the Iranians, that they couldn't pass an FBI background check to drive a school bus. They would not be allowed to clean the toilets at any military base in your country, yet they run the Homeland Security Committee, the Armed Services Committee, the Intelligence Committee, the Justice Committee, the Environment Committee, the Education Committee, and your Congress, and not in your Senate, in your Congress. Could that be a problem, folks? You can do everything you can to sort out this country, sort out the tax, sort out the education, but if you don't clean the traitors out of your government, where's it going to go in the long run? This is why people have got to be serious about internal security again. It's been given a bad name since the McCarthy days, right? Well, the only thing wrong with Mr. McCarthy is he didn't go anywhere near far enough at all. And the Communist Party coined the phrase McCarthyism, and that has terrified your Republicans ever since. Sticks and stones, people. When your national security is at stake, why are you worried about being called a nasty name? People get terrified of being called racist or Islamophobe. Didn't you learn that lesson at elementary school? Sometimes you get called bad names. So what? Is that an excuse not to do your job? President Trump doesn't worry about being called dirty names, folks. He did, he'd be a wreck by now, wouldn't he? So then I'll come to the other big threat that you've got right now. The big national security threat that faces you, other than your treasonous congressman, is, I'm not downgrading Russia or China or North Korea or ISIS or Iran or Al-Qaeda, but the thing that could destroy you more quickly and surely than anything else is illegal immigration. That could take you down, and it's very simple math. You tell me if my math is wrong, because we think of illegal immigration as a rule of law problem. We think of it as a health problem. We think of it as an economic problem, but ultimately it's a national security problem. Now, MIT released a study recently, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, saying there are 22 million illegals in this country right now. We've been told 11 million for about the last 10 years, right? Now, some people say it's more like 45 to 50 million, but let's go with 22 million. That's a reputable organization. Be conservative. So 22 million, and of the voting, they say 80% of them, 70% are voting age. What percentage of those people do you think, or what political party do you think those people will vote for if they're given citizenship and voting rights? In what proportion? 30%, 40%, 50%? Okay, 95. Let's go for 80. We'll be conservative, right? So if Hillary Clinton promised to give all of those people citizenship and voting rights within 100 days of taking office, that would have given the Democrats 14, 15 million votes overnight. Now, Mitt Romney lost his election in 2012 by 2.5 million votes. Donald Trump won by 200,000 votes, and thanks to the wisdom of your founding fathers and the Electoral College, and actually lost the popular vote by nearly 3 million. So what do you think would happen to your country if the Democrats got 14 or 15 million votes straight after the next election? What's going to happen, people? Well, you're going to lose Florida instantly. You're going to lose Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, almost certainly Texas, plus a whole bunch of other states. But you only have to lose Florida, Arizona, and North Carolina to have never another Republican president ever. Ever. It's a one-party state from that point onwards. On election night 2016, folks, you came that close to losing your country forever. That close. And I still don't think most conservatives and most Republicans really understand what's at stake here. That the country is on such a knife edge. And if you think the Democrats are arrogant now, what do you think they'd be like with complete power, a 14 or 15 million vote majority, and the GOP completely out of power forever? What do you think they'd be like then, folks? You think they'd be gentle and magnanimous to you? You think they'd leave you to sit in your churches and worship as you wish? You think they'd allow you to rebuild your conservative base and come back in future elections and take them out of power? What communist government has ever done that, folks? And these people are communist people. Right. They're not progressives. They're not liberals. Why do we allow them to call us racists and Nazis and fascists and white supremacists, and we call them liberals and progressives? These people are communist, folks. They're Marxists and they're communists. So, if I thought there was no hope for this wonderful country, I'd be back in New Zealand right now building bunkers and stocking up on baked beans, right? But I think there's an awful lot of hope for this country. Now, have you ever seen, hi Tammy, have you ever seen as much hatred and vitriol directed at a sitting president as this one? No. Anything close? No. Reagan, Bush, there's always a bit of, fisticuffs there, but there was always a little bit of bipartisanship and a little bit of fairness, was there not? This is vicious knife fighting now. No mercy. No mercy whatsoever. So why is that? I think there's two basic reasons. The first is really easy to understand. It's just human nature. Those Democrats were so fired up on election night, so believing their own propaganda, so absolutely certain of victory, that when it all went the wrong way, they're like a bunch of kids who thought they're going to get the biggest bike you've ever seen for Christmas and got a pair of socks. But you sort of, you get over that after a year or two, don't you? Normally. But they're not getting over it. Because the real reason is this. Because they understand that if this president is successful, that if this president can keep the economy pumping, if he can keep the regulations coming off business, if he can keep the taxes coming down, if he can get that border wall built to stop the flow of drugs across your border, so young black kids in the inner cities can actually get jobs again, and not having to compete with illegal labor. If he can do all of those things, there'll be an economic boom like we have never seen before. And you know, right now, there's a big realignment going on in US politics. When President Trump went out to those union guys in this state, in Ohio and Pennsylvania, it said, so this is what voting Democrat has done for you guys, and NAFTA, all these closed down factories. Where's all these big high-paying union jobs you used to have? Well, why don't you guys vote for me? Because we're going to rebuild industry in this country. And a whole bunch of them said, hell yeah. And for the first time in their lives, they went into a polling booth and they ticked the box for a Republican. And when he went to the black communities and looked at their inner cities and said, so this is what voting Democrats done for you. Poverty, unemployment, drugs, crime, fatherlessness. So this is voting Democrat. Well, why don't you vote for me? What do you got to lose? And a whole bunch of them said, heck yeah, and they did. Trump has got a 29% approval rating in the black community right now. We haven't had that since Abraham Lincoln, people. You know, and this is freaking the Democrats out. Because what the Democrats do, they add up all the ethnic blocks, the blacks, Latinos, they add up the soccer moms, the millennials, and they add all these little percentages up till they get 51. And if they lose 5 or 10% of the black community and some of those white union voters out in, you know, in this state, Michigan, etc., they can't win. And they understand that if President Trump can keep the economy humming and keep the taxes coming down and everything's booming, what have they got to offer? Because Democrats thrive off misery and jealousy and poverty and dependence. When everybody's happy and everybody's making money, when everybody's living the American dream, what have they got to offer? So they cannot allow him to succeed. Because if he succeeds, they fail. And not just for the next few elections, maybe for 20 or 30 or 40 years, maybe their party splits up. They understand it's either him or them. That's what it comes down to for them. Either they survive and prosper and basically run your country into the ground forever, or they go out of power and America takes off on a whole new path of prosperity. They cannot countenance that thought, folks. That just gives them nightmares. So they have to do everything they possibly can to destroy this president. Everything they can. No mercy. Have we seen that play out at all? You know? If it was just the old Republican Democrat game of yesteryear, you know, it would not be like this, would it? But they've gone way to the left, and we need to go further in this direction. We need to go further towards the Constitution. I say this, to save this country, we actually need to further polarize this country. Because we have to paint the left as the communists that they are, and we have to go right towards the Constitution and stand proudly for the Constitution, so every American voter has a choice between America and communism. Because right now they just have this vague, they know the Democrats are a bit rough, but the Republicans aren't really standing up for what they believe in, so what's the difference? Well, President Trump has increased the polarity because he's standing out there and standing up for stuff, and the left is standing up for stuff. Well, we got to move more of our people in Trump's direction, and we got to point out how bad those people are, how far off the track they've gone. So the Democrats have a plan, okay? They've always got a plan because this is survival at stake for them. So who remembers the old Rainbow Coalition of the 1980s? Jesse Jackson, that great scamster, right?
Yeah.
Remember him? So what he did, he ran twice for president, 84 and 88, and in 88 he got fourth in the Democratic primary and 7 million votes, which was way more than anybody ever thought he was going to get, because he was a very marginal figure even then. So his idea was very simple. He borrowed it off a Black Panther in Chicago named Fred Hampton, who died in a gunfight with the police. And Fred Hampton had the original Rainbow Coalition. You get the black radicals and the brown radicals and the white radicals, and you all work together. So Jesse Jackson expanded that. So he got the black radicals and the white radicals and the Native American radicals and the gay radicals and the Asian American radicals, the Latino radicals, the Muslim radicals. So he had every stripe of the rainbow. He had the yellow stripe, the brown stripe, the red stripe, the lavender stripe. And this was his terminology, not mine. This was a conscious strategy. You get all the colors of the rainbow together to form a progressive coalition. But in those days, minorities were 12% of the population. Now they're 38% of the population. So he was way before his time. Now, and I'll say another thing, the Rainbow Coalition was completely run by Maoist communists, pro-Chinese communists from the Communist Workers' Party, the League of Revolutionary Struggle, and the Line of March. It was a complete communist operation, and they got 7 million votes from a whole bunch of people all over America. So when the Rainbow Coalition collapsed, because Jesse Jackson gave up and moved on to other scams, so the League of Revolutionary Struggle, which was the main communist group that ran the Rainbow Coalition, they also dissolved. There were about 3,000 members, and most of them went into the Democratic Party. Now, one of them was a young black Stanford University law student named Stephen Phillips. He was Jesse Jackson's West Coast student organizer in 1988, took a whole year off college to work on the campaign, a very heavy Maoist, and he learned a lot from Jesse Jackson. So he moves into the Democratic Party. He was on the school board in San Francisco for a couple of years, but he married very, very well. He married his Stanford University sweetheart, a young woman called Susan Sandler. Now, Susan Sandler's parents, Herb and Marion Sandler, used to own an organization called Golden West Savings and Loan. Does anybody remember that? It was about the 4th or 5th biggest savings and loan in the country. All built on subprime mortgages, and they sold it out to Wachovia Bank for $2.6 billion. That bankrupted Wachovia, that then had to amalgamate with Wells Fargo. But the Sandlers got their $2.6 billion, and they put half of it into the Democratic Party and the socialist movement. So what is it? And Steve Phillips, their son-in-law, basically became their emissary to the Democrats and to the socialists. So what does a young Maoist revolutionary do with hundreds of millions of dollars at his disposal? Well, one of his first projects, he was sent down to Atlanta, Georgia in 2005, where he met up with George Soros and Tom Steyer and Norman Lear of People for the American Way. And that's where they set up the Democracy Alliance, all these left-wing billionaires. It's now expanded to over 150 members, and they put billions of dollars a year into the Democrats, left-wing candidates, socialist groups, ballot measures and that kind of thing. In 2008, Steve Phillips got $10 million and he reinvented the Rainbow Coalition, and he did a big voter registration drive and get out the vote effort for a very close friend of his in 16 southern and southwestern states, signed up probably a couple of million black Latino voters in critical states. And that is how he got his good friend Barack Obama ahead of Hillary Clinton. So Steve Phillips gave you Hillary Clinton. So what I gave you Barack Obama. Barack Obama won on the Rainbow Coalition strategy, getting all the progressive groups, the ethnic groups together. That's how he won. It was a rerun of Jesse Jackson. And the big mistake they made is abandoning that strategy and running Hillary Clinton. And they have learned from that mistake. So Steve Phillips today, he's written a book. It's called Brown is the New White. It was a New York Times bestseller, endorsed by Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi. Google it, read it, look it up. It's the Bible of today's Democratic Party. Steve Phillips argues this. He says, Democrats, forget the middle. Forget the middle voters. Don't waste your time putting billions of dollars trying to convince 2% of people in the middle to come your way. You've already got the majority in this country. You just have to get them to the polls. Because his argument is this, 23% of the electorate are progressives of color. Latino, Asian American, Native American, Cambodian American, Muslim American, etc. 23%. 28% of the electorate are white progressives. They will vote Democrat no matter who is on the ticket. 23 plus 28 is 51%. The new American majority. You Google that phrase. It's all over the left side of the internet. So, but the problem is they're not all voting. So instead of putting all these billions of dollars trying to get 2% of people in the middle, you go into the southern states, you find the areas with big Asian, Black, Latino populations who all lean Democrat but don't normally vote in high numbers, and you get into them and do massive voter registration drives and get out the vote efforts in Texas and North Carolina and Georgia and Florida, Arizona, Alabama, the southern, southwestern states. And that's exactly what they are now doing. You saw this happen when they ran Roy Moore. You know, Roy Moore tried to win in Alabama in the Senate race, and he should have easily won that election. But he got in trouble with the scandals. So Steve Phillips and his friend put about $6 million into Alabama. They rejuvenated the communist networks that have been there since the civil rights era. They did a vote or die campaign. They told the black communities that if they didn't vote for the Democrat, the Klan was coming back. And they won by 20,000 votes. And the head of CARE in Alabama, the Council on American Islamic Relations, which was part of this coalition, boasted that Muslims won the race because the margin was 20,000 and they signed up 20,000 Muslim voters in Alabama and they all voted for the Democrat. You saw this again in the race, governor's race in Georgia and Florida, where you had Andrew Gillum, the Marxist in Florida, Stacey Abrams, the Marxist in Georgia, both proteges of Steve Phillips. They put about $10 million into each race from George Soros, Tom Steyer, and Steve Phillips. They did massive voter registration drives in the black and Latino communities of Fort Lauderdale and Tampa and Jacksonville, and also and obviously in Georgia as well. And they came that close to winning. That close. And it was only because you had two great conservatives, Brian Kemp in Georgia and Ron DeSantis in Florida, who called out the commies for what they are and called out their corruption and socialism and lifted the Democrats lifted their vote by 40%. But Ron DeSantis lifted the Republican vote by 41%. And that's what got us through. But this is a strategy they are pursuing all around the country right now. Now, everybody's focusing on the Midwest. They're forgetting what can happen in Florida and Georgia and Alabama. So I want to tell you now who I think will be the Democrats' candidate for 2016. And I'm telling you, 2020, and I'm telling you, it's going to be a rainbow coalition election. They blew it in 2016. They're going back to the plan in 2020. Now, do you think Bernie Sanders is an ideal rainbow coalition candidate? You'll come to that. Do you think Joe Biden is an ideal rainbow coalition candidate?
Yeah.
He's too old, he's too white, and he's too creepy, right? So it ain't going to be them. Now, I'll tell you who it's going to be. there's going to be these three people, and they all connect back to Stanford University in some way. Steve Phillips at Stanford was part of a group called the People's Platform. It was the front for the League of Revolutionary Struggle on Stanford. It's how they elected their candidates to the student government. Just after Steve Phillips left college, a couple of young twins from San Antonio attended Stanford University, and they stood on the People's Platform and both won positions in the student government. That is Julian and Joaquin Castro from San Antonio. Joaquin Castro is now, Julian Castro is standing for the presidency. He comes from San Antonio communist royalty. His whole family has been involved with the communist movement for over 50 years now down there. So he, I believe, will be a contender for the VP ticket. He's Latino. You need that on the ticket for the Rainbow Coalition. There was Steve Phillips had another friend. He was a young black football player. He was a radical, but not an extreme radical, but he was pretty radical. And Steve Phillips nurtured his career, gave him a lot of money and steered him through. And sorry, my apologies. My apologies. And he nurtured his career, and he gave him $6 million, I believe it was in 2013, and he elected him to the US Senate from New Jersey. That is Spartacus, Cory Booker, a complete Steve Phillips protege, made by Steve Phillips. Now, there was another one. Steve Phillips also had a young friend at Stanford. She was half Indian, half black, and her father was a Marxist professor, openly Marxist professor at Stanford. And she was radical. And she ended up being a top operative in the Hillary Clinton campaign, and her husband, on Steve Phillips's recommendation, because he put a whole bunch of people into the Obama administration, became number 3 in the Justice Department under Eric Holder. Well, her name is Maya Harris. She is now running her sister's campaign, Kamala Harris. She is going to be the candidate, people. She's going to get all Hillary Clinton's money and all Bernie Sanders' support base. She's half black. She's half Asian American. She's a complete Marxist. Her boyfriend, Willie Brown, who got a whole bunch of jobs in San Francisco, was a longtime Communist Party supporter who moved into supporting China. So she got a Marxist father, Marxist boyfriend, and a communist sugar daddy in Steve Phillips. And she is being positioned right now to come through the field and be the Democrat standard bearer. She's female, she's ethnic, and she is going to have either Cory Booker or Julian Castro on the ticket with her. The other faint possibility might be Pete Buttigieg from Indiana. Buttigieg, whatever. So whatever his name is, now just, Pete's a little moderate, right? He's this moderate, Democrat. He's a bit progressive, but he's got a lot of sensible ideas, right? His father was the top Gramsciist scholar in the world. Now, Gramsci is the Italian Communist Party leader who basically came up with the idea that you win revolution through infiltration. And this man was the president of the International Gramsci Society, translated Gramsci's works into English, and that's Pete's dad. And Gramsci is the theory that guides democratic socialists of America. Infiltrate, 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 infiltrate. Now, Pete was on the Democratic Socialists of America mailing list as a young man and worked heavily with Democratic Socialists of America in South Bend, Indiana. Virtually every single Democrat candidate has a Marxist background. The only one I haven't identified so far is John Hickenlooper of Colorado, and nobody's ever heard of him, and he has no hope. All of the rest are Marxists. But I'm going to tell you, including Amy Klobuchar, and I'm going to tell you that I would bet a steak dinner at any restaurant in town, it's going to be Kamala Harris on top. And she's going to run the Rainbow Coalition strategy. She's going to promise amnesty to all illegal immigrants. She's going to go after the brown vote, the black vote, the Latino vote, the Muslim vote, you name it, all of that vote. And they hope to run against what they hope is a very damaged President Trump and win the election with 51, 52, 53% of the vote, then they're going to legalize every single illegal immigrant in the country. And if they do that, they will have you forever. Does any of this sound a little bit far out or a little bit too crazy?
No.
Does it sound remotely plausible?
Yes.
Because you Google everything I've said tonight and you'll see, you read Brown is the New White, you look at Steve Phillips, Google him with Kamala Harris, Google him with, Spartacus, and you'll see what everything I've said is absolutely correct. So this is the situation. The next election, I can't promise you which way it's going to go, but I can promise you America is not going to be the same afterwards. It's either going to be on the road to way, way worse or way, way better. And that may come down to one congressional seat in Minnesota. That may come down to, a few hundred votes in one state. Remember the hanging Chads in Florida in 2000? So this is an argument for everybody to get involved in the next 18 months. Because if we lose the next election, we may never get another meaningful election in our lives. This is not something you say, I'm going to go on a holiday for 18 months because I'm going to work really hard in 2024. I'm going to work really hard in 2028. This may be our last shot, people. This seriously may be our last shot because the math is not going in our direction. But if we win and the president keeps on keeping the taxes coming down and you drill in your own oil and your own gas and deregulating things and building that wall, you could see a very, very different America in a very short space of time. So what the message I've got is, it's either going to be way worse or we can make it way, way better. Now you think of this. Right now the president has a very, he's lost the House, so that's tough, but we can take that back. But he's also had this great problem that he's got more, Winston Churchill used to say, said, my opponents are in the other party, my enemies are within my own. And that's very true with President Trump. He's got a lot of people around him who would stab him in the back very quickly if they got the chance. And two of them, he's got a very tight majority in the US Senate. Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins are basically Democrats. So he hasn't got a majority in the Senate. So you imagine if he got the House back in 2020 and we could get him 2 or 3 or 4 more conservatives in the Senate, he would be unleashed, people. He would just get going. Now, the other thing, President Trump has put more than 100 judges into the circuit courts around this country. Now, that is record numbers, and that has will have huge impact in future times. That will make a huge difference to this country if we can keep going long enough to allow that to come to fruition. And think of the Supreme Court. See, the problem with America right now, you've had 60 years where the Supreme Court has been controlled by the left, and they make a bad decision, and they call that a precedent, then they pile another bad decision on that, and another bad decision on that, and another one on top of that. 80% of what the federal government does is unconstitutional. You've got all sorts of restrictions on your gun rights, on your religious liberties, all sorts of onerous taxes, all sorts of unconstitutional things that are holding you back every day, that are dragging this country down. I sometimes wonder how this country does as well as it does, given the handicaps the federal government piles on top of you. It's a testament to the ingenuity and the work ethic of the American people. That's all I can say. So you've got all this going on. Well, finally, we have a majority on the Supreme Court. Now, I know that Roberts is a flake, but at least he votes our way more than not. So you are going to see, we've already had the Janus decision passed, which is going to cripple the government sector unions. Even FDR didn't believe in government sector unions. He knew what a disaster they would be. The teachers' unions are one of the biggest child molesting organisations in the country. folks. Just before I go into the final point about that, just think about this. I want President Trump to have a whole list of things he does in the second terms. And one of the most important is this. I believe that any young black kid in Alabama in 1954 in the poorest school district in the state would have got a better education in the basics than any white kid in the richest school district in Minnesota does today. Guarantee it. Because you had this Department of Education foisted on you by Jimmy Carter. You didn't have it for 200 years and nobody died, right? You know, you had the best public education in the world. Since Jimmy Carter put that Department of Education on you, your education has gone into the toilet, people. You all know that. And you're losing your children because they're being brainwashed every single day they go into public schools. No, they did it. I saw a map recently. If only millennials had voted in the 2018 election, if only 18 to 25-year-olds had voted, I think it was, Republicans would have won 3 states. Because the young people are being indoctrinated like you wouldn't believe. So if we're going to win this country back, we have to put it very high on President Trump's agenda to abolish the Department of Education. That has to be up there, folks. If we don't do that, we're going to lose. If you imagine if 20% of kids in this country went to college and 80% of them did apprenticeships or went to trade school, what a different country this would be, people. Actually learning real jobs, no whacking student loans. You imagine how that would change the culture very, very quickly. But back to the Supreme Court. So right now you've got a 5-4 majority. It's a very slim, very unreliable majority. But Ruth Bader Ginsburg is getting pretty old, people. She's very old and her health is not well. You imagine if President Trump gets another 6 more years. Well, Ruth Bader Ginsburg says publicly that she wants to go and retire in New Zealand. Okay? Well, I'm willing to take one for the team, folks. You can send her down to New Zealand. She can play bingo all day long. And you will have a 6-3 majority on the Supreme Court. How would that be for Schadenfreude, folks? Imagine what that would do for your First Amendment rights, your Second Amendment rights, to get rid of all the illegal government departments, all the oppressive taxation and regulations. Your lawyers, your good conservative lawyers, could have a field day for the next 20 years, stripping the deep state away, stripping the regulatory state away, till you return to the free and prosperous America that you grew up in. Is that possible, folks? Is that far-fetched or sort of off the wall? So this is how I see it. You are in a moment in history that's going to decide so much. You've been given a God-given opportunity with this president to seize your politics by both hands and beat it into shape. And that's going to take work and commitment. And if you don't do it, we're going to head for disaster. But if you do it, imagine what we can have. You know, as I say, I can't promise you much, but I can promise you 2 things. If we ignore this great opportunity and do nothing, your children are going to live in slavery in this land. Your children are going to curse their own parents for delivering them to a life of hell, folks. Anybody think that's an exaggeration?
No.
But if you double down and you give it everything you've got over the next 18 months for your God, your constitution, your country, and your family, if you give it everything you've got to turn this around, 2 things may happen. 1, you may give it all that's within you, and maybe we still lose. Maybe. But at least you will all earn the right to look your children in the eye and say, I did everything I possibly could. But what is that worth to you, folks? And if you win, and you absolutely can win this, because that 2016 election, that convinced me that God is not finished with this country yet, folks. If you win, you can spark an economic boom like you've never seen before. You can give your children prosperity like we have never seen. And more than that, you can bring back your constitution, you can bring back your liberties and your freedoms, and you could spark a liberty revolution, not just in this country, but all over the world. Now, do you not think they want to be free in Britain and France and Australia and Chile and Brazil? Do you not think they want liberty all over the world? If America goes down, it goes down for everyone. But if America can recover its constitution and its economic dynamism and its military superiority, that's going to inspire freedom fighters the globe over. All the dictators in the world will be put on notice, and they will fall like dominoes. So I can't promise you too much, folks, but I can say this. If you give it everything that's within you, you have the chance to give your children not just the amazing country that you inherited, but one even greater. You have a chance to liberate millions, if not billions of people all around the world, and it could all depend on what you do in your home district, in your own precinct. Every effort you make could be enough to make the difference. Is that worth fighting for, folks? So I want to say to you people, thank you so much for what you do for liberty, for America, for my country. God bless America, and God bless Minnesota, and God bless you all. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I didn't come all this way to be low-key people. But is it time for questions, Wes? Look, can I please bring my friend Tammy up for just a couple of minutes? She's been a friend for many years. She lives here in Rochester. She's a comedian. She's an actress. And she'd just like to say a couple of words.
I think I met Trevor through the internet about 11 years ago. It's 2008. Yeah. It was when we were fighting and trying to get that information out about Barack Obama and the truth behind Barack Obama. No one was listening. Not the news, nobody. We just, and then the Tea Party started. I was on the Capitol steps. It had gone out, and I showed up, and everyone looked at each other like, what the hell are we doing here? Right? No one knew what this was, but I knew it was a movement. And the Tea Party, I believe, is responsible for getting President Trump elected. It was the Tea Party. We started it. And we became friends on the internet, and I kept trying to get him on the Glenn Beck show at the time. And I was calling everyone, emailing all the conservative blogs that I was very tight with and very involved with. And then I went to visit my sister in Arkansas, and I saw, oh my God, this Trevor that I've been corresponding with is going to be speaking in Arkansas. And so I went out to see him, and we've been friends ever since. So he had told me at the time, and I've read his book, by the way. You really need to read his books because he documents all of these socialist Democrat commie organizations and how many of the Democrat politicians have been involved with them for a long, long time. This is not made up stuff. He's documented it. And that gives him more credibility to me than anyone with a conservative voice. So listen to what he has to say, because he's predicted so many things, except for one thing he did predict. Do you remember this? He was a Ted Cruz fan. Yeah. He was a Ted Cruz fan, and I said, no. I worked in the movie industry. I worked in commercials. I worked in PR and all of those kind of things. And I know what sells and who's real and who's not real. And I said, the second that Trump came down that escalator, I went, that's the next president of the United States. That was it. I knew it totally day one. And I had to convince this guy, and now he's fully on board, as he should have been from the beginning, because you gotta listen to your friend Tammy. All right, but I love him. Please spread the word, buy his books, get the word out about Trevor Loudon. People can learn so much information, and that arms you to be able to argue with those idiots who don't know what they're talking about, okay? It really helps you, so thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Tammy. And as you say, we've known each other for many years. We've met a few times, and when I knew I was coming to Rochester, I had to let Tam know I was coming. But look, is there any question? Well, just before, look, I've sort of run out of books, but I've got all my movies there. And look, please, if you like what I said tonight, have a copy of the movie, because that exposes all the commies and Muslim Brotherhood in your government. And it's perfect for bringing your friends around who know there's something wrong but don't know what. And it can even convert Bernie Sanders supporters, I'll tell you. But any questions? Lady right up the back.
It seems like people are wising up and they're calling it the Democrat Socialist Party, but I don't think that goes far enough. Maybe we should be rhetorically confronting it online in social media and saying it's the Democrat Communist Party.
Yeah, look, we should see it's, you weren't even allowed to say the word socialist a few years ago. And President Trump has given us a great opening when he got up at the State of the Union and said, this will never be a socialist country. Well, that gives us the opening to take it even further. These people aren't just socialists, they are full-on commies.
That's right.
So yeah, look, as I said before, they call us fascists and Nazis and white supremacists, and we call them liberals and progressives. Well, we're going to call them socialists and Marxists and communists, because that's what they are. It's just truth in advertising. So yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Is your next project anything from the church going to be coming out this year?
Yeah, well, the next movie project I've got going, I'm working with Judd Saul out of Cedar Falls, Iowa, only a couple of hours from here. And our next movie is going to be Enemies Within the Church. And we've shot about half of it. We raise a bit of money, we shoot a bit, we raise a bit of money, we shoot a bit. So our target is to have it out by the end of this year. And the reason we're doing it is this. Andrew Breitbart, who many of you would have heard of, had a great saying. He would say, politics is downstream from culture. The culture shapes the politics. But culture is downstream from religion. The religion shapes the culture shapes the politics. So if your culture and politics are sick, what does that tell you about your religion? What does it tell you about your churches? See, what the movie will deal with is the massive communist infiltration into the mainstream Protestant churches. I'll just give you one example of this. Who's ever heard of the phrase situation ethics? Situation ethics. It means, in the old days, ethics was what came out of the Bible, what came out of the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery. That was the basis of our ethical system here. Situation ethics, which came out in a book in 1966, told you basically, well, that's old-fashioned. Ethics is really anything you feel you need to do as long as you do it in the spirit of love, right? So if your kids are starving, it's ethical to steal because you love your kids. You've got to feed your kids, right? So a pastor who is in church and thinks, well, should I tell people the truth or should I water down the message so it doesn't offend people? Well, he'll be thinking, well, I'll water it down because I don't want to be unloving to my flock. I don't want to scare them away. Every cowardly act is justified by situation ethics. As long as I do it with love, that's okay. Well, there's a consequence of that. So if everything is permissible with love, so therefore anything done in the spirit of hate would be impermissible, right? So what are they calling you these days? You're all haters. And you cannot be allowed to do hateful things. It's an act of love to shut you down, because the left is all about love and situation ethics, and we love the people, and you people are haters, and you want to hold the people back. So the ethical thing to do is to shut you down, to take you off Facebook, take you off Twitter, slash the tires in your car, beat you up if you're wearing a MAGA hat. That's an act of love to these people, and it's justified. Well, a man who came up with this wonderful concept was a man called Joseph Fletcher. He was one of the top theologians in the country. He was the head of the Harvard Divinity School and the Episcopalian Divinity School. He helped to found Planned Parenthood with Margaret Sanger. When he wrote his book, he left the church after that, became a declared atheist, and started up a euthanasia society. Joseph Fletcher was for more than 30 years a secret supporter of the Massachusetts Communist Party. All through the time he was leading the church, one of the leading Christians in America, he was a secret Stalinist agent. And he changed the morals of this country, completely changed the way the churches view morality and most Americans view morality. So that's one example. So they infiltrated the Protestant churches. They infiltrated the Catholic Church. They put 1,100 young communists into the priesthood in the 1930s. By the 1960s, when they had Vatican II, the big liberalization in the church, they were perfectly poised. They were bishops and cardinals by that point, and now you have a Marxist pope. They took over the Orthodox churches, the KGB, which controls the Moscow Patriarchy. American Orthodox churches owe allegiance to that. And the only churches that were free of this Marxist influence for a long time were the evangelical and Baptist churches. Well, now you have Marxist organizations like the Gospel Coalition, which is run by Tim Keller, who is a devotee of the Frankfurt School, a Marxist school, highly respected Christian. Christians read his books all over the country, and he's spreading Marxism through the evangelical churches. You've got Russell Moore, the head of the Ethics Commission of the Southern Baptists. You know, the Southern Baptists, they're going to the left now. They're all about social justice, critical race theory, all about global warming and welcoming immigrants, refugees into the country. So you're having a massive Marxist influx into the evangelical churches. Because, you see, if you want to take down America, you have to take down the churches. And they already had most of them, but these pesky evangelicals kept doing stupid things like electing Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump. And that could not be allowed to continue. So there's been a huge effort in the last 5 years to take the evangelical churches to the left. And you've got hundreds of young pastors now who once would have supported Ronald Reagan and Israel, now support Palestine and Bernie Sanders. And that's going right through the evangelical churches. And our next movie is going to expose this and how it's happening and exactly what we need to do about it. Because if we lose the churches, we lose America. It's as simple as that. So if you want to learn more about it, go to enemieswithinthechurchmovie.com. You can see a trailer, you can make a donation, but enemieswithinthechurchmovie.com. Well, we want it out by the end of the year, but it all depends on funding. I've got a big fundraiser in Michigan in about 2 weeks, and we're hoping to get a lot of money out of that and complete the filming anyway. But it's so that's what we're doing. I'll tell you what, I'm more scared about some of these radical Christian organizations than I was of the communists and the Muslims. I'll tell you, they play dirty, some of them, real dirty. But any other questions?
Playing on your terrorist thing, didn't Articus announce it last week? Wasn't he on record as saying, I can't win it, so I'm out?
Not that I've heard.
I saw that. And how's Betsy DeVos going to do with that education?
Yeah, well, look, Spartacus is coming out just 2 days ago talking about gun registration when he becomes president. So I don't know about that. Okay, but I'll check it out. Look, Betsy DeVos, I don't think was the ideal candidate, ideal Secretary of Education. She's too much, and like I think education needs a revolutionary at the top of it. She needs to get way beyond her past to sort of support for Common Core and all these silly things. Look, the best thing Betsy DeVos could do is abolish her own cabinet post. To get it so there is no Secretary of Education. Why do you need one for? No Secretary of Education, no ambassador to the United Nations. Why do you need one when you're not a member? So there's a bunch of things we could do. And like if I was the president for one day and I could do one thing, it would be abolish the Department of Education. Because that is the biggest thing that's dragging your country down right now and dragging your young people into all sorts of decadence. Any other questions at all? No? Yes, Wes.
Just want to thank an anonymous benefactor in the audience who doesn't wish to be acknowledged, but that person paid for tonight's room. So could we just give that gentleman? Together, you raised a nice little packet of gas money for Trevor Loudon. And there's also, in the back of the room, as you leave, there's programming guides for a nice radio station in the area.
Well, see, this is the thing, people. If this country is to be saved, and I believe it will be, it's going to be by the grassroots. It ain't going to be by the Mitch McConnells and the Kevin McCarthys of the world. It's going to be by people like you, who put their money and their time and their resources because they love their country and they love their kids. That's why you do it, is it not?
That's right.
And that's what's gonna save this country. You are the same people who fought the Civil War, fought the Revolutionary War, folks. That 3% who fought the war, that 20% supported it, and 40% supported the British, and the rest didn't care. Well, that's the same proportion we've got now, and you are the guys who are going to save us.
Videotaping.
Yeah.
Will this be available for distribution, Wes?
Yes, the link will be made available. Also, other people will have it on their social media since I'm currently in Facebook jail.
No,
So other folks will get it out to you. So
And it should be,
fourth time, I'm a hard one.
it should be distributed
Yes.
indiscriminately,
Will
like anywhere?
Yeah.
I think
There's
you
no
can share it.
copyright by me.
Yeah, I think the information wants to be free. I don't think it wants to be sold or kept.
No, like you just,
Put it anywhere.
yeah.
Blast it out to your social networks and
I-
celebrate the fact that this kind of meeting can take place.
Yeah.
It's your Fifth Amendment rights. It's your First
Well, would we be doing this meeting tonight if Hillary Clinton was the president right now? I wonder. Yes, sir.
I would like to ask that not only social networks, I don't do Facebook, I don't do any of that garbage.
To your benefit.
And so how do I find out about this stuff?
I'll make your day.
Thank you.
We can send a DVD out. We can burn some DVDs too. We have that capability.
Yeah, we
have
that capability.
If you have an internet connection, we can share you a link to the YouTube channel where you can find it.
But maybe one more question and then we'll,
I appreciate it was tailored to Minnesota.
right.
Yeah.
Well, it was, but the principles, you've got a little bit more of a handicap here because of the history of the state. But look, you almost went for Trump last time. You almost went for Trump. Well, that's exactly that's what I was going to say. That's what I was saying. The Midwest is going more conservative, and you're part of that wave. Most people who vote for the DFL in this state are good, salt of the earth people. Fine, patriotic people. They love their country. They just still think they're voting for JFK and Harry Truman. They don't understand what's happened to the DFL, and they are very salvageable. They are very turnable. And I think a lot of them admire President Trump and what he's doing. President Trump's ratings are going up and up and up across all demographics: female, black, Asian, the whole lot. So we got to keep that trend going because the left is doing everything they can right now to shut us down because they're desperate. They understand the consequences if they lose. So we just got to take that as a compliment and keep soldiering on, because victory is within our grasp, more so within our grasp than it has been in our lifetimes. 5 years ago, if I told you, 8 years ago, if I told you there's going to be a president like President Trump in the White House, would you have believed me?
No.
No, I wouldn't have either. So I'm glad to be proven wrong. I'm glad to be humble. One more question, sir.
You're spot on as far as the DFL. The Minnesota is, being that we're an agricultural state. Historically, my grandparents were DFLers, hardcore. They were farmers. But I'm thinking we have an old guard, the older that still think they're voting for President Truman.
Yeah.
And we need to. This will sound bad, but once they die off.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's just like if they die off, then we have a young, because I'm teaching my youngest about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and saying because the schools will not do it.
Yes.
And my oldest is here, and I thought when I say he's a staunch Republican, but we didn't force him to vote. We told him both sides and said this is what, and he had.
You did?
The
schools taught me one side, I just didn't like it.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to see the other side, because I was told my dad would say, you need to vote, we need your vote, and they were hardcore Democrats.
Yeah.
But the Democrats of 40, 50 years ago, the issues are not the same as today.
Now, can you imagine your grandparents being all on board with transgender bathrooms? And all this kind of stuff. This is not Harry Truman's policy or they would be in the Tea Party today, those guys. So things have gone to the left. And the millennials, the young people, that they are more conscious of freedom than any generation for decades. There are more young conservatives out there, more young people who know about the Constitution now than they have been for 50 or 60 years. Because they can see their country is in trouble and they're looking for answers. And some of them are getting sucked in by the Bernie movement, but a whole bunch of them are coming our way through groups like Turning Point USA and the Tea Party movement, etc. And I just say, here's a little cynical thing I tell people sometimes. Like a lot of people say, how do I convince my son or daughter that being liberal is not a good idea? I say, don't talk to your son or daughter, talk to your grandchildren. Because they will listen to grandma or granddad. But sometimes your children won't. And do you know why grandchildren and grandparents get on so well? Because they have a common enemy. So, it's the duty of people of the older generation, you talk to your grandchildren, because they're the ones who are going to, your children are too busy with mortgages and jobs and careers. Your grandchildren are just starting out in life, they're just going to college, they're just starting jobs, and they want a good future, and they need to be armed and need to understand what this great republic is all about. And they will listen to you when you teach it to them. They will wrap it up. So I think that's, you adopt it, talk to your grandchildren, make it a big effort. And then when you've got you talking about it and your grandchildren talking about it, your kids are going to learn by osmosis. They're going to get it from both directions. And they'll come around. So look, please come and see me at the table. I really want you to get the movie if you haven't, because that is a tool that you can use to sit down with your kids, to sit down, bring some of your hunting buddies round or your friends round and sit them down and watch that video. It will shake them up and give them a whole different view of American politics. Far better than a book could or anything like that. But most of all, I just want to say I'm very thankful to Wes for inviting me here tonight. I'm very, very grateful to you people for turning up tonight. I'm proud to be amongst you and grateful to be invited to speak to you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I don't have a DVD.